Hello, welcome back to the channel. So Star Rail's design philosophy has definitely changed a lot over time. I mean, if you look back at a lot of the version 1 characters, they were a lot more simple and honestly have a lot worse design kits than a lot of the more modern characters. But you can tell that their philosophy has shifted to try and make each character feel bigger and just more exciting in terms of both story and gameplay. But I think Acheron was really the point where the sort of like design philosophy as a whole really started to change, because she was our first big heavy hitter kind of character, like an Archon level sort of character, to use that example from playing like Genshin. And we did have characters that were exciting before, but the closest in version 1 was maybe Empowered Lune, but even then I feel like it wasn't on the same level, you know? And they have been trying to basically capture that same excitement and hype ever since, I feel. And honestly, I think that has been both good and bad at the same time, and honestly they've been kind of succeeding. I mean, Final, I believe, made almost like 100 million, which is insane, but and I can understand wanting to make each character feel more important, since one, it gets more people invested in them, because they feel like they have, more of a purpose, and two, it gets people to pull for characters they might not otherwise. But I feel like there is such a thing as trying to hype up characters too much, wherein, trying to make each character feel big, it just ends up kind of burning people out because it feels like they're just getting the same thing over and over again, right? And I'm not saying that characters should feel cast aside, because that is way worse, and it just ended the problem that Petticoat had. But it's the same problem as only doing 5 stars, where having characters fill smaller roles makes each world in the game as a whole feel bigger and more expansive, and just, in gameplay, just give people more options, Whereas if you try to make each character feel like, this big hype, event, it can sometimes feel like you're just trying to push them for the sake of getting people to pull for them even more, even if I do, get why they would want to do that. But besides just, hype and story, I feel like Acheron was really the point where the animations for characters and just how attacks look in general went on a whole other level. Not to say the old character animations looked bad, a lot of them I would say looked pretty good, Welt. Even the patch before 2.1, Black Swan's ult still looks pretty good. But Acheron kind of brought this whole, other level, and now we're getting characters like Cyrene, which, even if you have a problem with their kit, you kind of have to admit that her animations are insanely good. And to be honest, they should be for being, the last stand for this character. I just feel like the devs are trying to do, more unique stuff with every character's animation, which I think is a good thing, because how every attacks look, I think, is as equally as important for combat as the kits themselves, because Star Rail is a pretty simple game. There is not that much to it. You have 3 different buttons in most cases, and that's kind of it. So having each animation look good and interesting between characters keeps the combat more engaging than it might be otherwise, and you're going to be seeing them constantly, especially if you're playing something like Follow-Up or just a character that attacks a lot. So them constantly getting better and becoming more interesting makes them a bit less annoying to see constantly. Now, besides just the aesthetic stuff, in terms of actual combat, I think that this has been the biggest shift, and I think it has been both good and bad at the same time. First, she introduced the whole stacking ultimate system, which I do think is good to have, but I feel we're starting to get to the point where it feels a bit overdone. I mean, we had Acheron, then we had Fei Xiao, who's basically almost the exact same thing, then we had Finon as well, who was also kind of the same thing. And now recently we had Cyrene. I think it does make sense for their kits, but it's starting to feel a bit more like a gimmick than anything. I guess technically you could count Casterus in this, but at least Casterus is charge thing. It feels a bit different from just the whole number stacking mechanic. And I do hope that in the future they try something new, because I feel like we have enough characters with that sort of mechanic at this point. It doesn't help that a lot of them are pretty similar to one another. Both Fei Xiao and Acheron's ults are just big burst damage. Cyrene kind of as well, but just for supports. Finon feels the most unique, since he basically changes his whole kit, which ironically I think he's the character that uses the ultimate stacking the best, because it, one, both fits his story and also fits his gameplay. The others I honestly think would work fine if they just had energy, but because of how strong his ultimate is, it makes sense that it feels like you need to actually work up towards it, But besides just the stacking mechanic, I feel like Acheron is really where the game started to become a lot more archetype-centric. Obviously, archetypes have always been a thing before, I mean, the most obvious one being Dot. I mean, we literally got Black Swan right before we got Acheron. But I feel like the characters were more designed to be kind of generically good, whereas with Acheron, she's only really good with a couple of characters, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think, like I said before, I think it's fine to have some characters be niche. I think the problem is more so when it feels like that's all we're getting, and I feel like the game has kind of transitioned to basically every character needing another character to work at all. It has caused this effect where it feels like almost every character is a must-pull since they enable other characters to work at all, or potentially even in the future, like what happened with Sunday before he came out, or even like Cerridor getting better as more skill-based DPSs might come out. And I just feel like Acheron really started this trend where teams just kind of feel like they're already built for you, and the alternatives to the best in slot characters are just so much worse that you might as well not even bother if you don't have those best in slot characters. Like, not to say that it is like impossible to clear without being the most optimal possible, because it isn't. Plenty of people have beaten a lot of content with different 4-stars and things like that. But teams a lot of the time now feel so much worse without their best in slots that sometimes it almost just never feels like that worth it to build them, when you're just going to end up with like a mediocre result. The only exception I can think of is maybe like Baby Casters, but even then I'm not sure. Like overall, I feel like Hoyo saw the amount of excitement and hype for Acheron, and have been trying to capture that ever since. I mean, just look at all of the Euphoria. So every character has been pushed as this big deal, and while I do think it is good for the story to some extent, since it makes each character actually feel like they have a purpose, it leads to things feeling a bit more of like just the same, and needing the bar to constantly go higher and higher. Like, because all this ends up doing is just having to make each character feel bigger than the last to make them exciting, and also just ends up leading to more power creep as well. I honestly feel like trying to make each character feel hype has just made things feel more stale, ironically, because you're just getting like the same thing over and over again, I mean, even just looking at the story, Acheron was a callback and, a connection to Honkai Impact. Now we have Amphorius, which is basically an entire callback to like Elysian Realm, and Final End with Cyrene and all those characters, or even Cypher as well. So it feels like them just trying to repeat what already worked, but it feels like it's just doing the same thing over and over again, instead of actually trying to do something new, which is what I feel like the game really needs, But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below, like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.